Welcome to Chapter 7 in this of our cruise planning for our BVI flotilla. In this chapter, we're going to cover meal planning and provisioning. Summary of items that we're going to talk about are planning considerations, meal planning, provisioning, and food preparation. There's several factors that we need to consider when we're planning for our meals. What are the cooking capabilities of the on the boat? For example, does it have a stove, two-burner stove, or maybe on some of the yachts we'll have possibly even have a microwave. But if we were planning a cruise on like Capri, we since there are no stove, no refrigerator, very bare bones, we'd be eating either a regatta, a cold meat sandwich, or peanut butter and jelly. Also, storage facilities on a boat are really small because everything is compact, so we'll need to keep things as uh, reduce space as much as possible. Another factor that we need to consider is how long are we going to be gone? If we're going to just be for a weekend, we just got a few meals to plan. But for our case, where we're going to be gone for 7 days, we'll have a lot of meals to plan for. Also, we need to consider what are our ports of call, so that if we're planning to eat in a restaurant each evening, where are we going to stop? And maybe we might even include some lunch stops along the way. In addition, we'll need to consider our crew preferences. Perhaps they have special dietary needs that they may have that we'll also need to accommodate. We need to take factor in all the things that we might, in play. For example, are we going to eat all our meals on board? Well, then we'll have more meals to buy provision for. Are we going to stay? My plan is to spend every night in a different restaurant and have an evening meal there. Uh, we also need to figure out how many meals are we going to need to eat while we're underway, because those will affect the type of things we can eat. Let's look at some of the capabilities that the boats we might have and how we're going to cook on them. Our boats that we're going to be chartering from the BVIs will likely have a small stove, two burners probably of propane, and then also a small oven. Now that's, if we were doing cruising on Lake Clinton or Lake Michigan, we may have, much more limited size. Our boats will also have an ice box and a refrigerator where we can keep our cold goods cool for the whole week, and we won't have to worry about their, you know, being spoiled. But again, on the boats there are lots of nooks and crannies to put things in, but they're not very, it's not like you're opening your pantry at your home because there's very limited space. You might want to take advantage of this space and have to repackage things. Take the cardboard packaging that comes from the store and repack them. But you need to write on the can if what the material, what's inside it, so that if you're expecting it to be green beans and you end up with uh, pork and beans, that might be a different factor. We also need some fresh, a bit of fresh water for our personal consumption. We usually get about 4 or 5 gallons to start out with, and see how long that lasts. And then midweek we'll buy some more water at a different ports, for example, and we'll figure out where those water stations are. There's probably water in Leverick Bay, Soper's Hole, Cane Garden Bay. Josvek, I think, also has water available. As we're planning how many meals, it's the length of time increases the number of meals we're going to have. So if we're gone a week, we're probably going to expect maybe 7 meals a day, 7 times, that's 49 meals. And then you multiply that by the number of crew. If we've got 4 people on board, then you need 49 meals for 4 people. And so, well, that's a lot of food, and that we need to keep in mind. We also can, if we will, on our way, we'll be able to stop at different places and supplement our provisions. For example, we can get water in some places. Gee, if we happen to run out of rum, we can get that in different places. There's always places to do that. In addition, we may be able to get some more fresh bread or eggs or things like that that we might want. Here's a picture of one of a typical stove on our boats. Uh, they're gimbaled so that you can cook when you're underway. I remember on a race, we were a distance race on Lake Michigan, and we were planning to have lasagna, spaghetti and lasagna. And we put it in the oven. We had a big tray of that stuff, but in the gimbaled stove, got it all hot and everything. The thing was full of good stuff, and it was smelling delicious. But the boat was rocking and rolling so much we couldn't safely get the the pasta out of the oven to eat it. So it was like a torture the whole time we were there. As we start planning for our meals and provisioning, we need to consider several factors in buying food. First of all, we need to consider our itinerary. Well, we've already decided that we're going to the BVI's. We're going to spend about 7 days, and so we need to have enough food and supplies for that time frame. We also need to look at what are our ports of call? What islands are we going to visit? What are the capabilities of those islands? What things do they have on shore? We need to think about, are we going to make any lunch stops? So if we're going to stop at a restaurant along the way, we don't need to make meals for that day. And each island has a restaurant. Some of them may only have one, some have more than one. And then that becomes a constraining factor for us in our planning too. As we, you know, go to like Cooper Island, their restaurant is very small, and so they can handle 40 or 50 people, in each seating. So we'll need to make reservations so that they're ready for our flotilla, which will have about 40 people on it, and so that they've got enough space for us to sit down without too much trouble. We also need to consider what the crew preferences are for our plan. Um, there may be some medical considerations. Maybe one of your crew has food allergies of peanuts or are on a gluten-free diet. Perhaps there may be some special things that we need to consider. Perhaps a vegetarian diet or a cholesterol type approach, or maybe a South Beach or keto diet. We need to check with our crew to find out, if there are any special situations like that, so that we can plan for that in our provisioning planning. And there's a story of one of our people that have been on a flotilla with us had an instance where they were sailing with somebody new that had just started a diet, and they made the meals for the first day, and at the end of that, the crew, the guy who was on the special diet was still hungry, so he later in the day, he went rummaging around and found food in the fridge and, ate that. A little bit later, he was still hungry, so he went down and rummaged around in the food um, and had another snack. After the second day of rummaging around, feeding the needs of this guy, he'd pretty much eaten up all the food that they had planned for the provisions for the week. So that made it a little bit of a touchy situation for that boat as they tried to reprovision on the fly for their crew. We also need to consider how many meals are we planning to eat aboard. For example, if we've got 7 days, if we're going to really plan for 3 meals a day, that's 21 days of provisions. If we've got four crew on each one, so that's 4 crew times 21 meals. That's a total of 84 meals that we need to provide provisioning for. So that's a lot more food, and it kind of counts up pretty quickly. So when we're planning for meals, there's really two approaches that we can take. Well, of course, we've got the loosey-goosey approach, but really we've got the rigid plan, which is and a flexible plan. The rigid plan is we determine how many meals we're going to have, list the food that we're going to eat each day, and then buy the food for each specific meal that we're going to do. The flexible plan, we might consider, okay, we're going to have these kind of entrees. We're going to have turkey on one day. We're going to have roast beef another. We're going to have eggs for breakfast on 3 days. We're going to have pancakes for two, French toast on another, and then just kind of, depending upon your mood, which one of those things you're going to have. Our meal planning will probably end up with a combination of the rigid and flexible approach. A rigid plan does not allow for considered changes in case of the weather or other factors that may make uh, need adjustments. For example, if the weather is bad and the seas are high and people are seasick, they probably won't want a really heavy meal. They might just want a light snack. Um, in addition, we need to probably plan for a few group meals, like our dinner meals when we're going to eat in a restaurant. And then also we want to have, some snacks that we could just have, that are available to just pull out when you're hungry or need a little break, or maybe you need a little ginger snaps to settle your tummy in, in some rough seas. There are two factors that are really, we really need to consider when we're underway. The basic rules: the smaller the galley, the simpler the meals. Our galleys are not going to be that large, so we'll want to plan for simple meals, uh, and so on. The other factor is save your best meal for the last day. This was really a treat for us on one of our regattas, or one of our cruises. We bought a um, mix for making cookies. And we had them stash them down in the bottom of the refrigerator. And at the end of the week, we said, "Oh, look at this! Here's our cookie bath." And so we made up these hot cookies for dessert on our last day, and it was just really the highlight. Made the meal the highlight of the week. Nutrition is important when planning our meals. You make sure that everybody is getting a well-balanced diet as we're on our cruise. We're going to go back to our theme that's been running so far: know your crew and know what their preferences are, and try and make them having a good time. I know if we were inviting Glinda's dad to join us on our cruise, there wouldn't be any broccoli involved in any of our meals. Similarly, if we have some of my other family members are not too happy, would not be happy if we had a lot of mushrooms in each one of our menus. So we need to kind of plan for that out. But generally speaking, fresh vegetables and fruit are always a good choice to have aboard. We also need to consider avoiding foods that are easily spoiled. Like I tend to avoid putting mayo on any of my sandwiches when I'm planning for a meal unless they can be kept cold, and and avoid spoilage by them. There are also bananas don't travel well when we're putting them on a boat because they're so easily bruised, and they get overripe really quickly. Another thing that you might consider, that we don't see so much around here, is long life milk. This is a packaged a quart of milk that comes off the shelf that doesn't have to be refrigerated until you open it, and that makes it easier for us to keep fresh. Additionally, it seems that meats that are packaged pre-shrink wrapped packaged by the manufacturer seem to last longer. Members of my family know that I'm not a big fan of leftovers. And that's probably appropriate here on the boat too, because we need to plan our meals so they're just right sized for that specific meal, because there isn't a lot of storage space for saving the pieces that are leftovers. We also can consider that when we're buying our food, canned goods have a longer shelf life versus fresh stuff. Especially on the boat, there's not a lot of storage space, there's not a lot of refrigeration space, so canned goods can keep well and last for our whole duration. We also might consider freeze-dried food for that. One of the things that I like to do is have a trail mix ready for us, that are available for us to pop out whenever we feel in the need for a little snack. It's a good idea to have a snack in the morning as well as in the mid-afternoon to carry us over till our next meal. Alcohol beverage, I really don't like to have beverage open when we're out underway, because we need to have everybody capable and able to handle whatever might come up in our on while we're underway. If a storm should come up or something break, we need to have everybody fully capable of helping us get this done. Although uh, we'd like to have a celebratory beverage with a snack whenever we're safely moored for the day. Beer and soda are very expensive because they have to be tripped in, brought in on a ship. Whereas rum is not because that's made locally. So we're likely going to mix up a rum punch in the afternoon as part of our celebratory beverage. Cooking on a cruise can be a chore. Unless there's a member of the crew that really wishes to cook all the meals, we should rotate the duty among several crew members. Simplicity is really the rule here. During overnight stops, we prepare lunch in the morning while the boat is not moving too much. This is preferred not only, as well as safer and easier than going below to make lunch while underway. We tend to avoid going below while underway as that tends to promote seasickness. When you get provisioning, you'll have to figure out how you're a plan for how you're going to get the goods out to your boat. Most marinas have uh, carts that, like this one in the picture, that can transport the stuff from shore down the dock to your boat. When we order provisions on the internet from one of the grocery stores, they'll actually bring the provisions out to your boat and deliver them right to you. When we've in the past we've said, okay, we've ordered our goods, we want them delivered at 9 o'clock, and somewhere around 9 o'clock island time, all the goods just get delivered right out to our boat. If we're out ashore, at a mooring, and we need additional stuff, we'll have to consider that way you'll have to move the goods through using your dinghy to get them out. One of the problems with dinghy transport is there's always seems to be a little bit of water down in the bottom of the boat that can get your groceries wet. So you have to put them in a plastic bag or something like that. When you go to store the provisions, as I mentioned before, there's limited space, and all the areas are kind of oddly shaped because of the edge of the hull is curved, and so the back of the um, cabinets are all curved and don't have a lot of space. There are often spaces around that are not just in the galley that you can store your food too. There's storage under in the cockpit under the seats in the cockpit that has a lot of storage available. We tend to store heavy items down low just because that gets our center of gravity down low and it makes it easy. The boat might perform just a little bit better in case you happen to get into a race. We also consider, the packaging, the material. We typically, around here would use a lot of cardboard boxes for storing things. Cardboard boxes on boats are not a good idea. First of all, the cardboard gets, dampness can make them not be, rigid, and they can collapse, as well as the cardboard boxes can transfer, bugs from the warehouse and things like that. And we don't really want our cockroaches to get aboard the boats when we're there. Ziploc bags are really good for storing stuff because they're collapsible and they fit into those odd shapes. Um, and we generally use a quart size bag or sandwich bags for packing our stuff. One of the tips that I read, and it's pretty cool, is if you put a cup of water in a Ziploc bags and throw it in the freezer the night before, then it'll freeze, and you can take that bag out, bang it on the winch drum, and that gives you crushed ice for your beverage in the next day. Typically, when we are starting our charter, we get all our goods provisions brought out to the dock, and then as we're bringing them in, Linda is checking off the checklist of, okay, this is what we ordered, this is what we got, and this is where we put it on the boat. There are various places, like the overhead bins in the salon. There's a storage area under the table. There's storage areas under the cushions, and knowing where each one of those items is really, really good for her sanity as well as organization. When we look at provisioning, if we're getting a crude boat, that means having a captain and a cook. They'll come pre-provisioned and they'll have all the food and everything already planned out for you when you arrive. Bareboat charters, like what we're going to be doing, have other options that we need to consider. Historically, the charter companies have had provisioning plans that were either full provisioning or split or partial provisioning. This week, when I called the charterer to say, okay, what are the prices per person? It seems like they have discontinued this process and have gone to more of a self-provisioning a la carte internet order like we've been doing. And so that's what we'll be. It makes it a little simple. That's one decision less. So what we'll typically do is we'll either choose over the internet. We can send our grocery list down to our store, either Bobby's or Right Way, and then tell them when we want to have the materials delivered, 9 o'clock Monday morning, and then the stuff will be there. Some people prefer to go pick their own fresh produce and things like that from the grocery store. And the grocery store is about 4 or 5 blocks away, so it's an easy walk. But then you have to carry all your materials back, which so if you're carrying lots of heavy things, that can be a little bit of a task. Or we can take a cab, pick up a cab, to haul you from the grocery store back to the marine area. Some things we bring just a little bit of stuff sometimes when we're going down if we're just looking for a handful. Back a few years ago, I was into having oatmeal with dried cranberries every day for breakfast, and so we'd bring a cup or two of dried cranberries in our packing supply and take them with us. There might be some other things like that uh, that we want to have for ourselves, but not necessarily want to buy in bulk. For example, if we wanted a little sugar for our coffee in the morning, we don't need to buy a pound of sugar for 4 teaspoons of coffee for the week. Those sort of things. This concludes Chapter 7, Meals and Provisioning. Please bring your questions to our next live broadcast, and we'll cover that along with our homework.